Okay, hopefully we got the kinks out. We're ready to get started. Welcome to our presentation today. We have the amazing Dr. Gary Moskowitz with us and that dumbass Alan Gassman. Gassman will go for an hour. It'll seem a lot longer. It'll be very boring. And then Moskowitz will go for 50 minutes and it'll seem infinite and wonderful. If you have any questions whatsoever, hold them for Moskowitz because Gassman's an idiot. Okay, I'm going to leave now. My time is up. Hope you have fun. I don't think you will, though. All right. Thank you very much. My name is Alan Gassman. I'm here with my longtime friend and mentor, Dr. Gary Moskowitz. We could talk about spine surgery, but we're not going to talk about spine surgery. First, we're going to talk about asset protection structures and stories, and then we're going to talk about professional acceleration strategies. Gary, any words of wisdom before we get started for those of us on our journey today?
Alan, thank you for a wonderful introduction. I really enjoyed it, but I'm afraid it's the other way around. The feeling is mutual.
All right. Well, those of you who entered through CPA Academy, you actually get CPA credit. And Brittany, isn't it 2 CPE credits? Yeah. Okay, so it's 2 CPE credits. So you'll have to watch it twice, the first hour twice, or watch the entire thing for a better impact. If you came in through our website, then no continuing education credit, but it's a little bit funnier. So if you have questions during the presentation, you can either yell at the screen as loud as you can, and we might hear it, or click on the inverted pyramid, or if it's a regular pyramid, go upside down, stand on your head, click on that, and then type out your question, and we may pretend not to see it. We have upcoming presentations. If you think this one's bad, just wait for the next one. I'm going to be talking on the 18th on estate tax planning from basic to beyond. And let me warn you, we have updated our estate view software. So if you're interested in fantastic estate tax planning software, then check us out. And then a new thing I'm really looking forward to, Marty Shinkman and I are going to start a quarterly broadcast called Practical Planning Quarterly. And you don't have to be a dummy to join in. So, by the way, our book, 8 Steps to a Proper Florida Trust and Estate Plan, has been reduced in price on Amazon, probably because it's not as good as it used to be, to $39.95. Gary, we're going to introduce in about 57 minutes, so hold on there, and thanks for dressing up for us today, Gary. Now, I spoke last Saturday and Sunday at a Maui Mastermind conference for my friend David Finkel. And the first thing I always think about when I go to a Maui Mastermind conference is, what are my goals and what do I have to do to get there? So if everybody could just think for a minute or 30 seconds about a goal. If you are a family, not a CPA or a tax lawyer, but you're a family, maybe your goal is to get started on an estate plan or to better understand your estate plan. If you're an estate planner, maybe your goal is to walk away with 3 good ideas of things that you can offer to your clients. So let's all have a goal, what you want to get out of this presentation today, and I hope that you get your goal, and plus you're going to get the 2 credit hours. Secondly, I would be remiss if I did not mention that you can't get everything you need in the estate planning world from one advisor. You may try, and there may be people out there who tell you that they can do this, but it takes a team and a good accountant, good lawyer, maybe different lawyers of different specialties, financial consultants, insurance consultants. It takes an army sometimes. It takes a family. It's not just one person. I've got some slides I showed my friends at Maui about how if you think you have enough liability insurance because you have a $10 million policy, maybe not so much. Here's a $32 million verdict for a 13-year-old's life. Here's a $29.5 million verdict caused by a peanut butter pretzel. Here's a $730 million verdict, the price of one life in Texas. Here's a $185 million verdict because of fluorescent light poisoning. This one scares me. I know I have plenty of clients who have fluorescent lights in their buildings. So these things go on and on. You really can't be too careful. And as we've said every time, it was not raining when Noah built the ark. Now, I wasn't there, but that's what I read in the story. It wasn't raining when he started building the ark. It just was raining when everyone got real interested in the ark. So I have a new checklist for you here. If you didn't have enough checklists, all the pilots in the audience know that you really live and die by your checklist. And a few things of notice. Number one, don't leave anything outright to anyone you like. Leave it in a trust, and the trustee can give it to them outright if they're ready for it. But if there's a creditor situation or a divorce situation or an estate tax situation, or quite candidly, I'm not really mature enough at any age to receive and take care of an inheritance, then you want to be careful there. Number 5, what is your confidentiality quotient? Brittany, write that down. We're going to do one on the confidentiality quotient. How long does it take me to Google your name and know all about you? And what information can I pull on a $50 Nexus Lexus report in 3 minutes to know all about you? If we put your companies in different jurisdictions and your real estate under land trusts, we may be able to enhance your confidentiality. So just a word to the wise there. Number 9, do you have a spousal limited access trust? I know you probably have a limited spouse, or your spouse thinks that you're very limited, but we're going to talk about spousal limited access trusts. They are really, really interesting items. And then number 10, we're going to talk a little bit today about stepped up basis planning. This is very, very popular, and it's a good business reason to set up an irrevocable trust. I set up an irrevocable trust for Marcia and my descendants, but at the same time, I give Marcia's father a power to appoint the trust assets to creditors of his estate, but only with the approval of our next door neighbor, who, by the way, I don't think will ever give him approval. Then he passes away, and believe it or not, the assets in that trust may get a new income tax basis equal to fair market value. So that is a pretty groovy technique. Now, David Finkel gave a great little talk at the Maui Mastermind. He goes, get with Alan or somebody equally boring as Alan, get all this stuff done, and then go take a shower. So that's why I put him on my slide for my presentation. That is David taking a shower because he finally got his estate planning work done. So now I'm going to do the first polling question. For those of you who are not CPAs, you do not have to answer this question. And I'm going to hit launch here. Now, when I hit launch, either the polling question goes up or I go, whoa, into outer space. Let's see which it is. Oh, the polling question went up. Thanks to Matt Polling at the Trenton Kempker Law Firm in Tampa. A fraudulent transfer under the fraudulent transfer law, which comes from the statute of the Queen of Elizabeth of 1530 in England. This happens when you transfer an asset to avoid a creditor, and back in 1530, they would transfer the sheep away so the creditors could not find the sheep. Now, A, is it true that this is not like committing fraud? I haven't defrauded anyone. I haven't been dishonest and stolen money. It's not a crime necessarily. But B, it is a crime in California and Connecticut. So those are states that begin with C and a vowel. That could be a crime. C, the creditor's primary remedy would be to set this aside, not necessarily to have a huge judgment, but just to be able to set the transfer aside or go after whoever received the transfer. Maybe that's the only remedy, maybe attorney's fees. And the true, correct, and best answer, all of the above. And I see that 74% of you voted. Now it's up to 78%, and that's all the time we have. I'm going to close the poll. Boom. Hope you didn't have your foot in the door when we close that poll. And now we go to Florida law on creditor protection. Now, I've already covered this, but if you have not seen the Florida law on creditor protection, you can go to YouTube, Google Gassman, YouTube, Florida creditor protection, and this chart will be explained. And if you've inverted the pyramid and you're looking at this chart upside down, I suggest that you get off of your head. It will look much better if you look at it right side up. Okay, now what are we going to do next? I want to talk about revocable trust because there's a lot of confusion. Almost everyone who has an estate plan nowadays, who has significant assets, has a revocable trust, which means you can change it. It can avoid probate. If I die and the assets are in my revocable trust, immediately upon receipt of a death certificate, Marcia can go to the bank, go to the brokerage firm, go to the title company and transfer and control whatever is in my trust. If I go loony, even loonier than I am now, Marcia could be the alternate trustee of that trust. She could have immediate possession and control of my assets, but there is no creditor protection and there is no estate tax protection unless it's baked into the document. And in fact, under state law, many assets that are protected in your personal name, like life insurance and annuities, may not be protected in your revocable trust. So be careful with the revocable trust. Now, on the other hand, the irrevocable trust, it has nothing to do with hearing. It has nothing to do with your ears. This is a trust that is irrevocable. It cannot be amended except by the trust protectors, and okay, sorry, had a little sound problem there. If I cannot benefit from an irrevocable trust that I set up and fund, then neither can my creditors. That is why the SLAT is so popular. I set up an irrevocable trust. I'm not a beneficiary. Marcia is a beneficiary. She can receive what's needed for her health, education, maintenance, and support. Our children can receive what's needed for their health, education, maintenance, and support. And then if Marcia passes away or leaves me, the trust agreement can provide that my next spouse would receive what that spouse would need for health, education, maintenance, and support, so that I can indirectly benefit from the trust. Now, what if I don't have a spouse or I need more than what my spouse needs for health, education, and maintenance? Can I be added back into the SLAT as a beneficiary? And the answer is that it's safest not to be, but it seems fairly safe that if my net worth went down way below what it is now and way below what it's expected to go down to, and if trust protectors are named in that trust and can add me as a beneficiary in their discretion with no duty to do so, that trust is probably creditor proof if it is in an asset protection trust jurisdiction within the United States. And if it's in a foreign asset protection trust jurisdiction that does not recognize US judgments and that clearly has law that says my creditors can't reach into it, then under those circumstances, It should be creditor proof. Florida and 9 other states also have laws which say that if I establish a SLAT for my spouse and it benefits my spouse for my spouse's entire life, even in the event of a divorce, then after my spouse's death, if I become a beneficiary, I am not considered to have made a contribution to that trust, and therefore my creditors should not be able to reach into the trust. But if it's expected that I will be a beneficiary of the trust after my spouse's death, then it is possible that the trust would be subject to federal estate tax. So it has to be really laid out that it is unlikely that you would benefit from a SLAT that you set up for your spouse and descendants at any time. If you're putting too much into the SLAT, or you're doing things or making moves that make it look like you expect to benefit from the SLAT, and the SLAT is formed in the United States, then I would not feel comfortable telling you that is protected. Now, a lot of people will set up a Nevada Asset Protection Trust. And Nevada law says that I can set up an irrevocable trust. I need a Nevada trustee, a good reason to go to Las Vegas to interview trustees and visit my trustee periodically. And that Nevada trustee can hold assets for the benefit of me and my family. I can be what's called a discretionary beneficiary. And according to Nevada law, as long as there's no creditors at the time I set this up and it's not a terrible, awful type of thing I'm doing to anyone, creditors cannot reach in to that Nevada trust, even though I am a discretionary beneficiary. But I live in Florida. So I set this up and I continue to live in Florida, and my creditors are in Florida. And maybe the Nevada Trust owns an LLC that I manage as a manager from Florida. Now, what is that Nevada judge going to say about that? And the probable answer is the Nevada judge is probably going to say, hey, Nevada set up this law. You've got a Nevada trustee. The Nevada trustee sets up a Nevada bank account. This is a Nevada trust. But what happens when a Florida judge says, wait a minute, I'm in Florida, and Gassman's in Florida, and the creditor's in Florida, and the Merrill Lynch account under the LLC is in Florida? I think Florida law should apply. And under the full faith and credit clause of the United States Constitution, I think that the Nevada judge should follow my order. We don't have a solid test case on that. We have a case called Clearwater, where a California trust moved to South Dakota, and the trustee refused to make distributions to an ex-spouse. The California court ordered the distributions, and the North Dakota Supreme Court said, not so fast. But we can't be sure whether that's the same result that would apply in the circumstances I just mentioned to you. So what do? Well, one thing is you could put the trust offshore to begin with, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit. Another thing you can do is you can make the alternate trustee of the trust an offshore trust company or an offshore individual. And then when things get tough, you ask the Nevada trustee if they want to resign. They resign. It automatically goes offshore, and then you have the protection of the offshore jurisdiction. Or you make the Nevada trust for your spouse and descendants, not for you. You can be only added if your net worth goes down below a certain amount, and if trust protectors add you, so then you're not really a beneficiary. And or, look what I've done here on beautiful slide 42. If you hold 42 upside down, it's almost 24, which was one of my favorite TV shows. All right. You set up an LLC. It's owned 1% by the revocable trust, 0.5% voting, 0.5% non-voting, 3% by a trust for those lovely children, 0.5% voting, 2.5% non-voting, and then 96%, yes, for those of you who are math whizzes, what's left is 96% non-voting by the Nevada trustee. So what happens? The Nevada trustee may be ordered by a Florida court to transfer the non-voting member interest to the creditor. Of course, the Nevada trustee says, sorry, I gave it to the offshore trustee when I resigned. But let's say the court says, well, that's a bunch of hoodly-doo. Hoodly-doo is what happens when a hoodly does doo-doo. That's hoodly-doo. I think that's a bunch of hoodly-doo. Give the 96% to the creditor. Then assuming that you could give 96% of the creditor to the creditor, what can the creditor do with it? They get what's called a charging order in most states. In Florida and most states, the only thing a judgment creditor gets is a charging order, which is the right to have an order given by the court, which says if and when the business or investment LLC ever makes a distribution, the distribution has to go to the creditor who has their charging order, now against 97%. But to protect that irrevocable trust for those cute little children or big, ugly children, depending upon what you have, the court will not allow the creditor to reach into the LLC. So what is that creditor going to have to do? First, they're going to have to get a Florida court judgment. Then they're going to have to take it to Nevada. Then it may be too late. They may need to take it to the Cook Islands, which is about halfway between Hawaii and Australia, or they may have to take it to Nevis, down at Nevis and St. Kitts below Puerto Rico, or they may have to take it to Belize or Gibraltar or the Isle of Man. They're going to spend a lot of money, and if they win, they get a charging order, so it's better to settle. And that is a little bit about that. So let's do our second polling question, and this comes, and I'm going to open this, I'm going to do it myself here. This I call Bob Burke's Law, because when I was a younger lawyer and Bob Burke was practicing law in Palm Harbor, Florida, I had the opportunity to work with him. And whenever a younger lawyer works with an older lawyer, you learn either good habits or bad habits. And I learned mostly good habits from Bob. But Bob used to sit down with a client and say, Mary and Floyd, for every complicated situation, there is a simple solution, but it's the wrong solution. Complicated situations usually call for complicated solutions. So I have launched the poll. Thank you, Brittany. I forgot to launch it. Speaking of launch, aren't you hungry? All right. Wow. We have already a high percentage of people have voted, and the answer is, thanks to Bob Burke, complicated situations call for complicated solutions. Now, those of you who are not answering this yourself, you've trained your cats to answer these polling questions. It needs to be you. The monitors are watching the video. If you are a cat answering the polling question, we are sorry. That is not sufficient. Or meow. By the way, that was not a real cat. Okay, a brief discussion of community property. It's not safe from creditors. If you live in one of the community property states and you have community property and somebody gets a judgment against one spouse, you can lose all of your community property. So we suggest consideration of the JEST trust, JEST, or separate revocable trusts. With a JEST trust, I could own 1%, Marcia could own 99%. But on my death, I can have a power to direct the assets of the whole trust to creditors of my estate. As long as I don't exercise it, Florida law will not let my creditors touch it. But on my death, the trust assets can go into Credit Shelter Trust A and Credit Shelter Trust B, which will receive, in our view, a full income tax step up equal to fair market value. So we could put $10 million worth of assets into a joint exempt step up trust. I own 1%, Marcia owns 99%. A creditor of mine can only get $10,000 out of the trust. If we lived in a community property state, we would transmute out of community property treatment. Then when I die, the $10,000 goes into Credit Shelter Trust A, and the $9,990,000 goes into Credit Shelter Trust B, which is then gets a full income tax step up and can also be held for Marcia's lifetime health, education, maintenance, and support, and never be subject to estate tax on her death. Now, if you instead have the traditional type of thing, if I have 5 million of assets, she has 5 million of assets, I die first, only 5 million goes into the Credit Shelter Trust. With the jest, the whole 10 million goes into the Credit Shelter Trust. Or here, if I only put 10,000 in my trust, I put 9,990,000 in Marcia's trust, and I die first, only 10,000 goes into the Credit Shelter Trust. So just a little brain massage there. A lot of commentators have said, we're not sure how it works, but Howard Zaritsky said, it probably works. So that's why we put Howard's picture there. If anyone says the jest probably works, they get their picture in one of our webinars. Please don't forget, I know I mentioned this too many times, but it's important to a lot of spouses. The marital asset preservation system, and I know a lot of you viewing this have this system. It basically says, hey, if Marcia dies first and for some reason 70% of the assets are not held in irrevocable trust to protect Alan and Marcia's descendants from that next spouse, then Alan has a legal contractual duty to Marcia and our descendants to immediately fund an asset protection trust with sufficient assets so that our marital assets, maybe 70, 80, in fact, a client I talked to Friday, 100% of assets has to go into this system to protect against my next spouse. Obviously, Marcia's met my next spouse. No, just kidding. So then I have a business reason to set up an asset protection trust, and it's not just for creditor protection planning. So if in the event of Marcia's death, I have a creditor situation, this gives me a business reason to set up an offshore asset protection trust that I think most judges would be understanding of in a legitimate type of situation. Let's get our third polling question out of the way here. For those of you who have short attention spans, this is the third polling question. And the question is, are you interested in more information on the national, let me launch it. Are you interested in more information on the National Institute for Charitable Education? And here's what that is. We wrote a book on charitable giving, and we wanted Stetson Law students to be able to work on the book and get pro bono credit. So I went to Stetson Law School and I said, can they work on the book and get pro bono credit so I don't have to pay them? And they said, well, you know, if you were a 501c3, they would be able to. So we went ahead, formed the 501c3. We put the book into the 501c3. Sales from the book now are income tax free because they are royalties, and royalties received by a 501c3 are income tax free. They are not unrelated business taxable income. And if you know any law students who would like to work on the book, or you would like to be a proofreader of the book, then please let us know. You can check the box for yes. And thank you to the 3 of you who checked the box for yes. 7% answered yes, 16% said please send more information, and 77% said, what is that? Okay, so we'll close that polling question and talk about some structures. Now, here is a structure. You have 3 Smiths and a Doe, and they had a company that did electrical contracting for construction, electrical contracting for repair, home repair, and they had a lot of trucks on the road and a lot of workers. So I read some court cases in Florida. We have some really good ones, and this is typical throughout the country, which say that if a company does business by use of an independent contractor, then the liability caused by that independent contractor is not necessarily a liability of the company. And then you have a lot of people who say, well, that's bunk, it'll never work. But if you read the case law, it can work. So what we did was we set up a construction electrical contracting company. We set up a home repair electrical contracting company, and we set up a vehicle and employee leasing company. We put all the vehicles in the vehicle and employee leasing company, and they're all financed to banks who have liens. Now, the employees are all paid by that contracting company. And about 40 of the employees work full-time for the construction company, and about 60 work full-time for the electrical repair company. So now, if one of these contractors on the way to a job gets into an accident, and that is the biggest risk, on the way to a job, they get into the accident, well, they are a contractor. They are not an employee. They are on the way to the job. We think that the construction entity and the repair entity have a very good position that they're not responsible. Let's say that the person gets to the job and they're working for the construction company, and while they're at the job, they back over somebody with their truck and the person dies and sues. We think that it will be difficult, maybe not impossible, but difficult for that creditor to reach into the construction company, but almost impossible for that creditor to reach into the repair company. See, if we get somebody who is in a house doing repairs, they're an independent contractor, it will be hard to penetrate the electrical repair company, but not impossible, but almost impossible to penetrate the construction company. So at least we've divided those two, and we've gotten, now you could have the construction vehicles under construction and the electrical vehicles under electrical, but you do have employees that switch back and forth. You do have trucks that switch back and forth. So we think that this is a better way to do it. And the same way we did here, now this is a company that, this is a business arrangement that sells and installs installation. Well, this company has a very active sales force, and they're driving all over creation, selling these products. They are in a separate sales company, and the sales company can be owned by the key employees and can be paid commissions from the installation company. So the installation company pays the sales company, the salespeople work for the sales company, and the best salespeople or the sales managers own the sales company. Now, a salesperson is in an accident, very difficult to get to the installation company. You got the vehicles in the vehicle company. These are the vehicles for the installers. This company leases the vehicle, owns the vehicle, subject to lots of bank loan, and hires the installers. And the installers, separate and apart from the sales force, work as independent contractors for the installation company. Now, on the way to a job, they're not at the installation company yet. We think the installation company is pretty well insulated. Get it? Insulated, installation company. If they're diabetic, then they're insolent on top of that. But there's some protection there. Under Florida law, even if the accident takes place while the installation is being installed, it's a little bit or somewhat difficult to get at. In fact, the Jacksonville DHL operation, what last I knew, was owned by an independent contractor of DHL. So when somebody got hit by a DHL truck, they did not have a clean shot at DHL. They only had a shot at the contractor. But you can go further. In preparation for franchising this arrangement, what if you put your unique name, your website, your proprietary practices, your mass supplier agreements into a licensing company or an intellectual property company owned by different family members or trusts for different family members, and they receive a licensing fee. You know, if I get hurt at Burger King, I'm going to sue that store, but I'm not going to be able to sue the franchisor of Burger King. There's a lot of case law on that because there's a lot of people who like to sue Burger King. So the last lawsuit was a real whopper. So anyway, please don't settle for no protection. Structure these companies to provide protection. And here's another idea. And I call this the Over Easy LLC. Sells better in the morning at Burger King. So you have the Smith store, and it is an S corporation, and they sell raccoon hats. Now, raccoon hats can be dangerous because they fall down on the floor and they're really slippery. People slip left and right on these raccoon hats. So they've got the raccoon shelving, they've got the raccoon hat maker machine, they've got all this raccoon hat stuff, and they've got inventory. So what we could do is do a tax-free F as in Frank reorganization and set up Smith Holdings LLC to own the Smith Store Inc. This is tax-free. And now, once we've done it, once you have a new parent company, Smith Store Inc. can do a tax-free transfer of its raccoon hat making machine and its long-term inventory to another subsidiary. So now when somebody slips on a raccoon hat, they get hurt. You would lose the shelving and the short-term inventory, but they would not be able to get at the raccoon hat machine. So that's where you have this S corporation. And then of course you can have a buy-sell agreement, put some stock in a revocable trust, have another investor. It's an LLC, so you would have charging order protection, whereas an Inc. does not have charging order protection. And you can have debt owed. If the store is worth $1 million, you can have an $800,000 promissory note owed by the store to the holding company and secured by a lien on the assets. So then it would be hard, a creditor would not have high hopes of receiving anything, and you could protect this raccoon hat operation. Okay, so advantages: no need to change the tax ID number of the subsidiary entity. The parent entity can loan money to the subsidiary. The new parent company can own life insurance for buy-sell purposes and not have that terribly exposed to creditors of the subsidiary. make sure that the parent company does not manage the subsidiary. So these are nice things, very few costs or downsides. So we do a lot of these over easy LLCs. They go well with pancakes and other things. All right, so I'm going to go to slide 90 now. Slide 90 is another little project I have going on. I'm on the diversity committee of the National Association of Estate Planning Councils with my friend Marty Shinkman, and we had an idea. Why wouldn't we go to a local law school near the Estate Planning Council and offer a student of color the opportunity to be an honorary member of the Estate Planning Council, go to all the meetings of that Estate Planning Council, be assigned mentors in the Estate Planning Council, and be assigned a task of pulling together a presentation to help people in need of estate planning. There's a lot of people who don't have a lot of money, but they have a lot of family, and they have a little house, and they have savings accounts and things like that. So thank you for opening the poll, or did you open the poll? All right, Brittany, would you be interested in sponsoring students to participate in an estate planning council? And the answer is yes, or please send information, or not today. Do, 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 do. Okay. Thank you very much for answering that. And on to our next item, page 123. I'm going to scroll there. By the way, get your installment notes while they're still around. The February applicable federal rate is 3.86%, long-term, midterm 3.82%, still a little lower than what it was in December, but a good reason to get your installment sales done. Okay, the Offshore Asset Protection Trust. This is something that I don't try to push. They only really fit a small number of clients, but this would be a client who, number one, wants creditor protection. Number two, may not be confident in the U.S. situation. I'm confident in the U.S. situation. I personally don't feel the need to have some of my assets outside of the United States. I don't think that one political party or the other is ever going to come and seize my assets or force me to sell my raccoon hats, but some people do. And some people come from countries where this has happened over and over. So it is certainly understandable. And because you can't really be sure whether a Nevada slat will work 100% for tax purposes, you can be sure that in Cook Islands, Nevis, or Belize, for example, asset protection trust will work because creditors cannot reach in. So you have a trust agreement, which is normally called a settlement because you settle the trust. Then you need a trust company or a trustee in the offshore jurisdiction. You may have a US-based co-trustee who co-signs on the trust accounts. You have a grantor or the settlor who transfers the assets into what we call the trust agreement. Because remember, a trust is not an entity like an LLC, it's an agreement. So the settlor gives assets to the trustee, which is normally the trust company, and those assets will typically be accounts held directly. Even if they're small, you would usually want an account held directly by the trustee to prove that you're really in that country, and it helps the trustee sleep better knowing that they have some real cash to draw on if things get rough. Sorry. And then you may have an LLC, and that LLC may be offshore. So if this trust is in the Cook Islands, which is a very popular jurisdiction for these trusts, and the LLC is offshore, and most of the assets are held in the LLC in accounts in Switzerland, or more popular now, Liechtenstein, which is near Switzerland, then where does the creditor have to go to get the assets? Do they have to go to the Cook Islands? Do they have to go to Nevis? Do they have to go to Liechtenstein? And the answer may be none of the above, because by the time they file their lawsuit, this may all have been moved somewhere where the grantor doesn't even know where it is. So, and the Nevis LLC might be owned partly by another entity if you want U.S. charging order protection, although the Nevis law gives you charging order protection even if it's a single member LLC. And if this trust agreement is formed in Nevis, and maybe the LLC could be in the Cook Islands, then if you file a lawsuit in Nevis to try to set the the trust agreement aside, you have to put a rather large bond in cash in the Nevis court registry, which will go to the creditor, the debtor, when you lose your lawsuit, which is why the last I heard, there has never been a court challenge of a Nevis asset protection trust. And then another LLC might be in another jurisdiction with accounts. So what are the downsides of these arrangements? Well, really, it's cost and tax risk. The cost is it's more expensive to set it up, it takes longer, and it's more expensive to maintain the trustees. The trustees mean business, and they have to comply with both U.S. Patriot Act law and the law of foreign jurisdictions. That is required in the jurisdiction of any reputable asset protection jurisdiction. It is a lot of red tape. They have to have passports, utility bills, letters of reference for not only the grantor, but also each beneficiary and also each trust protector. And then under the U.S. tax law, while it's possible to draft these where it would be considered a U.S. trust, if you satisfy a U.S. court test where you have a U.S. trustee and it's really subject to U.S. courts and not foreign courts, which doesn't look so good, then you may not have to satisfy the foreign law requirements. But if this is truly a foreign trust, then you have to file a Form 3520 upon inception, and a form called an FBAR form and other forms. And if you miss one of them, the tax penalty can be more than 35% of the total value of the trust, and then you have to do forms annually. So those are the reasons that we don't see so many offshore trusts. We see a lot of US-based trusts with offshore trustees as alternate trustees. Now, let me warn you, if you have a US-based trust that automatically flees offshore by its terms, not because of a successor trustee, but because of a flee clause, then it may have to file tax returns as a foreign trustee. And then a couple of things that people don't always know about, well, actually, a couple of things I wanted to mention that you may not know about recent income tax developments. First of all, there was a recent tax court case which said that an offshore foundation, also known as a Stiftung or something like that, was taxed as a trust, not a partnership. So those of you who do offshore foundations, they're similar to trusts, but a little different. You want to definitely look at that case and look at your foundation form and see what you need to do, if anything. Secondly, I wanted to mention that the Build Back Better Act has an S corporation provision, which says that if your S corporation was formed and was an S corporation before May of 1996, you can convert it to a partnership, income tax free under certain circumstances. Just wanted to throw that out there. 10 minutes left. Put up with me another 10 minutes. So now we've got more literature on these offshore trusts, a checklist for trusts, and then I wanted to talk about some structures. First of all, we have 9 minutes left. It'll probably seem longer. And Brittany, have I finished my polling questions? I have, right? Okay. So those of you who are CPAs, do your biological break now, 9 minutes before Gary starts, and then we have more polling questions. If you're a pole vaulter, you have 9 minutes to do a couple jumps. So here you have an S corporation. There's a lot of things you can do with an S corporation. You could have it partly owned by a charitable company, and then it would be less likely that a creditor would try to attack it if it's partly owned by a charity. You can have it owned by a trust that's disregarded for income tax purposes. You can have it owned by a QSST, where the income from the S corp goes to a lower income bracket beneficiary, or a Section 678 trust. So there's a lot of alternatives that most laymen don't know about and that a lot of us planners don't think about. So what I wanted to get to was a hypothetical family plan to show you some of these structures. Now, this family has an S corporation that owns an active business, an LLC or partnership that owns the real estate, a homestead, a vacation home, brokerage accounts, private investments, and collectibles, and plenty of threats to wealth. They've got estate tax, regulators, creditors, possible trust litigation, all those beautiful things that lawyers bring with us. So there's bigger slices of the slide, and they can have 529 plans, which are really nice. And here's what this family can do. They can simplify their lives by switching from this, which seems really complicated, to this, which satisfies Bob Burke's law. So what do I have here under slide 2A? For new businesses that the family wants to set up, they could consider a Bermuda charitable foundation. There's no charitable deduction for funding such a foundation, but there are also very few rules. As long as it is a charitable foundation, there is no tax and no minimum distribution rules. So somebody who is truly charitable may want to consider that with a good new idea. Also, there is something called a Bermuda Family Foundation, which is similar to a trust, but can be simpler than a trust, which can own assets and be very well creditor protected, but transparent from an income tax standpoint. Then, of course, the family could put assets or real estate or royalty rights into a 501c3 and get an income tax deduction and, of course, protect that asset, even though the family can be compensated for doing certain work for the foundation. It will certainly be creditor proof, and a judge will not want to take it apart. And if you're going to die and leave to charity, why not do it now and get the income tax deduction? And then a family limited partnership can make assets that you have access to very well protected from creditors, and might be owned 5% by a trust for children and grandchildren and 95% by the client for charging order protection, or an offshore or domestic asset protection trust for even greater creditor protection. And then this limited partnership or LLC might own a offshore labor-oriented company, which would be able to receive and trap profits offshore, that are not subject to U.S. income tax until they are repatriated, as long as it is a truly offshore arrangement, which is not hard to do nowadays because of the shortage of labor and the excellent foreign labor and work ethic. Not to mention the software that can be developed offshore that can have a significant value. Then the client may get a captive insurance carrier. If you're large enough, you're paying $1 million, $2 million a year of insurance premiums. Why don't you set up your own carrier and then pay your carrier? Your carrier does reinsurance. You get to deduct the payment for the insurance, and the carrier doesn't have to pay income tax because they're on the accrual method of accounting and they're reserving. And then later, if the carrier is profitable years up the road, they liquidate, and that comes back as a beautiful capital gain at capital gains rates. So that's the captive carrier under the limited partnership. Possibly set up a Section 1202 active business C corporation where you can sell the stock eventually at 0 or 50% of the capital gains rate, tax rate, depending upon what the rate is at the time. And then a financing company to factor accounts receivable to save those accounts receivable under the family limited partnership. Now, for estate tax savings, further estate tax savings, you can set up a foreign or domestic grantor retained annuity trust, where I give assets to the grantor retained annuity trust, and the grantor retained annuity trust gives me back payments over a number of years, and what's left in the grantor retained annuity trust at the end of the term of years stays there, creditor free and estate tax free for my descendants. And remember, a GRAT can own an S corporation or S corporation stock. Now, the GRAT, if it is offshore, the offshore GRAT trustee can have the power to pay me or pay other entities for my benefit. If the GRAT's in the United States, I'm in Florida, annuities are creditor proof, so the annuity payments I receive from a GRAT should also be creditor proof, or as I showed you, they can be paid to the family limited partnership. And then at the end of the GRAT term, it goes to the remainder interest. And then I can take other assets and make a seed capital gift to a dynasty trust that can benefit my spouse and descendants, and have that own part ownership of various other assets such as real estate, and owe me back a note that I can place in a family limited partnership that can be owned by an asset protection trust and a trust for my children. And that family limited partnership can take money that it receives on note payments and advance them to an irrevocable life insurance trust, which can buy life insurance on my life, either offshore or onshore, to pay the estate tax if there is any when I die, and to safeguard that life insurance without me having to make any payments. That can be very, very estate tax efficient. And then my home can go in a qualified personal residence trust to avoid estate tax on the home. So that is a simple pictorial of not a typical estate plan, but a well thought out estate plan. And then I will tell you that sometimes I speak at conferences, and when I speak at these conferences for lawyers, there's usually 1 or 2 lawyers who walk up to me and say, hey, I mostly represent creditors, and I came here today to see what you're doing. And I just want to tell you that it's going to be so expensive for me to study this plan, to take depositions to understand this plan, and then to try to attack this plan, that my client, the creditor, is probably going to offer to settle for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than they're owed, so they don't have to pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, not everybody says that, and almost everything here can have chinks in the armor. The main thing is to get this done before it's too late, before the creditors are there. Get your asset protection done, And then the most important thing for any speaker to do anytime, no matter what, is to finish on time. It is the noon hour, and I have saved 50 very valuable minutes for my good friend and one of the most brilliant people I know, Dr. Gary Moskovitz. Gary, are you here?
I'm here, Alan.
Beautiful. How would you like to begin? Would you like to give us a little bit about your background? I think that would be helpful.
Well, my background is I am who I am. When people ask people normal question, who are you? Most people say the name, or most people say I'm an accountant or I'm an attorney, but that's just a hat that we wear from time to time. So I am who I am, and I've done a lot of things in the past, and I continue doing things. And your show, Alan, go for it.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to say that you have been extremely successful as an accomplished professional, a dedicated physician, the owner of a very progressive and caring medical practice, the boss and team leader of a medical practice team who really value you and whose lives you have made very vibrant, and a very close family, things that you have done for communities, both publicly and anonymously, and now what you can share. And that's what's so very important. So back to you.
So, I mean, how do you get to this point, what people conventionally call success, or some people call it the American dream, because I was not born in America. I was born in western part of Ukraine, immigrated to, just a bit of background, immigrated to Canada when I was 13, had to learn English, go to school, get into medical school, go through the medical school residency, immigrated here about 30 years ago. So the question becomes is, how do you achieve success, whichever way you define success? There's an old German proverb that goes something like this: too soon old, too late smart. So that means we get old too soon, but we get smart a little too late. So the question becomes again is, I mean, as we get older, of course, the conventional way of seeing it, the way it's done conventionally, is you gain experience, you gain wisdom, and so on, and you use that. But is there a way to accelerate this process? Is there a way to get smarter and better and happier sooner than the conventional way? And as you said at the beginning of your talk, it's important to establish goals. So how do we get better and smarter sooner than the conventional way of doing it that we've all been exposed to, all been taught conventionally? So I think the way to do it is to condition one's mind in terms of how one mind operates and perceives things. The source of greatest happiness and joy and elation comes through our mind, from our mind, and yet the greatest source of misery, anger, disappointments also come from our mind, through our mind. We experience the world through our mind. And you can switch between those two extremes in an instant. It's possible to do it in an instant. So what is a more optimum state of mind, and how do we get there? I remember when I was doing my residency, in orthopedics at the Canadian hospital, teaching hospital, and we had a lot of students that would come through the operating room and observe surgery and so on. And I remember one particular day we were in surgery with this wonderful surgeon. His name was Frank Smith. He was British trained surgeon, proper, confident, excellent surgical technique, always confident, and with a great amount of poise. And one day we had a student that came in and to observe the surgeon. I was assisting Dr. Smith at surgery, and we put the student sitting on a stool, and Dr. Smith started the total hip replacement surgery. And hip replacement surgeries tend to be bloody and not very pleasant to observe, but it is nevertheless a technical, very important procedure and very beneficial to the patient. And Dr. Smith made a decision and started to proceed the surgery. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on the student, and the student's starting to get a little wobbly, and the color started to change. And then he moved on to the next step, and the student became more wobblier. Well, the bloodiest part of the hip replacement surgery is when you actually dislocate the hip, take it out of the socket, which is where you can hear it, you can see it, and it is quite a violent thing. When he did that, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the student just fell over right onto the floor of the operating room. And the nurse, of course, came around and helped the student up. So I shifted my focus of awareness from the student onto what was going on with the surgeon, with surgery. And the surgeon was a very efficient surgeon. There were no wasted moves. One motion smoothly went into another motion. He put out the hand of his instrument, and the instrument was automatically handed to him that he needed without saying a word. And that smoothness actually created a thought in my mind. I said, wow, this guy is really smooth. I mean, one move goes to another and it gets accomplished, all translates into a human body. It was like watching poetry in motion. So what was the state of mind of that surgeon? What was his state of mind? And what was the state of mind of the student? Those are two opposite things. So I kind of started thinking about that issue a while back. And after a while, I realized that the optimum state of mind is probably a state of mind, what we call relaxed awareness. When you're completely relaxed and yet you're totally aware of your environment. And that state, that is a very efficient state. And the product of that state, the product of that mind is actually very efficient product, and a smooth product, and a better product than a conventional state of mind, which may be somewhere in between those two. So that got me thinking along those lines.
Wow. Gary, when I know you've told me that when you are performing surgery, you view a bird of prey in the room.
That's one of the things that may exist in consciousness. A bird of prey is actually a cobra. Kind of keeps you in checks and balances. There's a proverbial cobra in the corner of every operating room. And it sits there coiled up very, very quietly. And the minute you start taking something that you're doing, especially something that's technical, for granted and become cavalier about it, the cobra will come out and strike you. So it's just one of those mental models, little things that's kind of in the background in your mind, not to assume anything, not to take anything for granted, because things can go off the rails at any time. So you have to keep your focus of awareness, your awareness completely a task in hand, and yet be relaxed at the same time. So what happens when you're in that state? You can very easily transition into the state of flow. So what is a state of flow? Essentially, it's a state of consciousness. It's a mental state. Have you ever been so involved in the task? I'm sure all of us had these experiences. We've so been involved in task and focused on the task and aware of the task and then you looked up an hour or two later, and it seemed like only 5 minutes went by. So when you're in a state of flow, your bandwidth, your human bandwidth, your mind is totally occupied with that particular activity, and you lose the track of time. That is a wonderful state. That's a great state that we try to emulate all the time without really knowing it. So it's a different state of consciousness. It's a different state of mind. It can also be experienced by race car drivers during the race, when it takes so much concentration, so much awareness. Concentration is almost a negative word. The next thing from concentration is going to be awareness, total awareness. Race car drivers experience all the time, where all of their bandwidth of their mind is occupied with this one activity. So what happens in a case like that is that there's a lot of technical stuff that's going on at the same time. For example, you have to calculate the turn and where to make the turn, when to apply the brake. You have to use the brake. You have to shift the gears with your hands. You have to use the steering. So what happens is when you're in that state of flow, there's no you, there's no car. What happens is that you actually merge with the vehicle and you merge with your environment, and there's only one thing. You disappear, the car disappears, the road disappears, and there's only one thing, and that one thing is experience. So there's no differentiation between yourself, between the machine, between the environment. It's a merger state, and that's a higher state. So that's the state that any professional can fall into, and it's a great state to be in. You can fall into that state through the state of flow, right after flow, during surgery, or during any activity.
So how do you make that happen? What are the steps?
Well, let's put down some basic scientific foundations for this. We don't experience external reality how it is. We experience reality how we are. So we take in outside information, for example, visual information. Light comes into your eye, passes through the cornea. Our corneal lens inverts the eye, it lands in the back of our fovea. And the fovea translates into the electrochemical signals that get passed through optic nerve and into the back of our brain. Same thing with the sense of touch, smell, and so on. So and our brain is contained within our skull, which is very hard bone. So the only way to get that into our brain, past our skull, is through the little openings that we have within our skull. So all the information gets into our mind, gets into our brain through these openings, and it occurs through electrochemical signals. Then these electrochemical signals hit our brain. They go through certain pathways that were established by evolution, the way our brains were wired, and then they get reconstructed inside our brain, and the product of this reconstruction is called thoughts and emotions. So reality is a reconstruction. It's a construct, how we construct it. The issue with that is it's totally unobserved. It just happens automatically without observation. And here lies the problem, or not the problem, here lies the issue, because this construct depends on how evolution has wired our brains, the hardware within the brains. It depends also on the past memories, our past experiences. It all comes in and merges into this experience that we perceive as reality, how we perceive reality. But in reality, we don't perceive the actual objective reality. We perceive our internal way of seeing things, our construct. So we live in the construct, and there's a delay. And to make it even more interesting, there's a delay between what's happening on the outside and how we perceive outside versus how we perceive it on the inside. It may be milliseconds, but there's also a delay. So not is it only not real, it's based on how we perceive it, but there's a delay in it. It's not in real time.
Wow.
So we live in a mental construct, and this mental construct determines whether we're happy or unhappy, whether we're angry or we're elated, and so on. So, and you can, so if you had awareness of this, then you can actually fine tune it and titrate how you experience reality and how you experience things, how you experience your emotions, and so on. And one of the simpler way of doing it is just actually through observing them, through observing one's thoughts, through observing one's emotions versus being pulled into them. So in your reading list, there's a book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. So one of the examples that Michael Singer gives is, we've all been to a movie theater. So you walk into a movie theater, you sit down, and you sit in your theater seat, and you're surrounded by other people, of course, that are in the movie theater at the same time, and then the movie starts. And imagine being in the movie theater back in the early 1970s or early 1980s, where the film, which was 35 millimeter film, for example, it has a visual track and it also has a soundtrack associated with it. And so when you start watching the movie, you start watching the visual, but the soundtrack is just a little bit off, of a fraction of a second off, and you cannot get into the movie because there's a non-correlation between the visual and the soundtrack. And then what happens is that things synchronize, things get adjusted, things synchronize, and now there's a correlation between the visual, the screen, on the screen, and the soundtrack. And the storyline is very good, and the actors are very good. So those are the two senses, of course, the visual and the auditory. And the actors are very good, the storyline is very good. So what happens after a while? You get pulled into a movie. You kind of start feeling what the actors are starting to feel. You're starting to get into the story, and after a while, you forget that you're sitting in the movie theater surrounded by other people, because you get into that. Your awareness is pulled into the movie, into the screen, because things are synchronized. But you can still look, you can still escape that. You can still look to the side and realize that you're sitting in the movie theater surrounded by other people, and there's a screen that's playing, and the speakers are emitting the sound. So you can still, your awareness can still shift. So imagine sitting in a movie theater where you're kind of in a suit, where there's also touch, sense of touch, right? So you add that as another sensation, which is a third sensation. Then you add a sensation. You can pipe all types of smells into the movie theater, and you're also smelling the things that the actors are smelling. They're having a wonderful meal in Monte Carlo, and you also pipe in the other senses. So what happens is when all of these senses are synchronized, are in sync, you get pulled totally into the movie. And when there's a total and complete synchronization of your awareness, there is no escape. You have been hijacked. And that's the state that we live in on a conventional day-to-day basis.
Wow.
So what gets hijacked? Our awareness. And it's somebody else's movie, somebody else that wrote the script according to them or according to the production.
So we're hijacking our own awareness, or the media is hijacking our awareness, or distractions are hijacking our awareness?
Our awareness is just being hijacked by the way reality is being perceived by our minds, by our brains, and by our minds. On a narrower level, the most valuable thing in the world is bandwidth. Human bandwidth gets translated commercially, whether it's by Meta, Facebook, media. They try to grab part of bandwidth through the way they formulate news podcasts and so on, which is pretty well pre-digested information. Social media has become very effective at this. And once they hijack your part of your bandwidth, they have you. So the question becomes, is how do we keep all of our bandwidth to ourselves and use our bandwidth and understanding of these concepts to grow ourselves, to optimize our state of mind? And one of the ways, it's actually a pretty simple way of doing it, is just watching our thoughts. So by watching your thought, you actually step back a little and you observe your thoughts. Very simple to explain, very simple to do for short periods of time, but after a while, that kind of, you revert to your normal state, or let's call it a default state. But then if you keep persisting and watching one thoughts and products of one thoughts, you actually find yourself in that state of being an outside neutral observer. You end up spending more and more time in that state. And that's a state that distances you from the hijack state, where a lot of your emotions that you feel, instead of being captured by them or captured by thoughts and repetitive thoughts, you actually become an observer of those things. So if you're experiencing a negative emotion or fear, for example, all you do is you step back and just watch it. So as soon as you start observing it, it no longer captures you. It no longer hijacks you. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have an expensive piece of art or expensive vase in your house, and you walk by it and you knock it off, and it falls down and it breaks into 10, 12 different pieces. You feel anger, you feel disappointment, you feel terrible, and you care. And that kind of sticks with you. And sometimes for minutes and sometimes for hours, you just keep coming back to that event. So what happened is that particular event actually hijacked your mind. You start getting all type of thoughts, which tend to be negative thoughts, and they occupy your mind. And that's a total waste of time. Once the vase is broken, it's done. The event already happened. It does no longer exist anymore. The only thing that exists is the imprint that it has left with your mind, in your mind. And that's a neurochemical imprint. And a lot of noise that event has created. And a lot of disturbances. So you can hold on to that disturbance and miss out on a whole bunch of other things that are available to you. Or it can continue disturbing you. So how do you let it go? And you have to let it go pretty well immediately, but putting yourself in the state of an observer. It's just an event, one of many events that just happens in university. Yeah, the vase broke down. The vase fell, it broke down, it's destroyed, doesn't matter. So nothing I can do about it, I'm gonna move on. So you just drop it. But it's very difficult to drop if you don't have awareness of your thoughts, of your state of mind. You can only drop it if you have awareness of your state of mind.
Gary, we're getting a lot of questions about polling questions, so we're gonna do the first polling question. Brittany, can you do these books Gary recommends? For some reason, my polling question control disappeared. Okay, so Gary, you want to walk us through the 3 books that you've recommended today? Happiness at Work, The Power of Now, and The Untethered Soul.
Well, Happiness at Work is a book by Dr. Rao, who was a guest on your webinar about 2 weeks ago. Really, really insightful book. He brings a lot of wisdom into the human condition. The next book is Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. He's another Canadian, lives in Vancouver. He had an incredible transformation when he was in his 20s. Book after that is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer that I have alluded to. And then there's also a TED Talk by Dr. Donald Hoffman, which is a 22-minute TED Talk. I believe you can post later, that we perceive reality as it is. And he's a cognitive neuropsychologist. So let's introduce one of Eckhart Tolle's concepts. What really exists in reality? Do you remember before we had conventional movies, which were on the film, we had these books. As you leaf through this book, there's a running man, right? Going through the various, running segments.
Yeah.
And if you take a page out of it, or page out of a movie, we call it the frame. So there's only one frame that exists in reality. None else, no previous frames exist, no future frames exist. There's only one frame. Because the past does not exist, the past is gone. The future does not exist because it's not here. So the only thing that we have is this one frame. So we only live in one frame, and that frame is now. So we decide whether we're going to live in now or whether we're going to live encumbered by the thoughts in the past or thoughts from the past or thinking about the future. As soon as we start thinking about the past, about various things of the past, we lose the only thing that we have, which is now. Our awareness is not on now. Our awareness is on our mind. Thoughts that were fabricated by our mind or imprinted within our mind. And as soon as we start thinking and worrying about the future, we lose everything that we have, which is now. So to us, the whole thing appears as a movie, as a continuity, but in reality, there's only one frame. There's nothing else but this one frame.
So how do you make that work to have time go to zero and love what you're doing and not have all these distractions for the vase I broke or the time I pre-record? I did a 2-hour video and learned that I had my microphone off. How do you get over that?
Well, yeah, how do you get over this too? Try to reduce the noise in one's mind. A broken vase example, you keep experiencing it for minutes, sometimes even longer. Most of these thoughts are kind of repetitive. A lot of them are random. They occupy your bandwidth, they occupy your mind. So you lose a very important part of your mind bandwidth. It all goes down the trash in a direction that you get pulled in, that you got hijacked in by your mind. You lose the experience, the beautiful experience of now, where everything is only available in now and not in the past and not in the future. So that's a very different way of seeing it. And again, remember, we're talking about a methodology where we can accelerate this, getting better at it, perceiving better, being smarter, faster, sooner, and overall making the overall experience much greater than our normal default experience of reality.
So what's the first exercise or the first step? Just sit in a quiet room in a quiet chair, watch your thoughts, and see how long you can do that?
Absolutely. Sit in a quiet room. When you start practicing anything, whether you start practicing piano or any new skill, it's best that you do it without distractions. You sit in a quiet room and just sit back and just watch the thoughts that come into your mind. Thoughts come and go. They come into your mind, then they leave, then there's something else that replaces that thought with another thought or another experience. Such you may feel a little bit of itching on your arm. That's fine. It's just an experience. Just be aware of that and watch your thoughts. You may lose that observer status pretty quickly after a few seconds or 10, 15 seconds, but that's okay. But then you bring yourself very gently back into observer status. And everything needs to be done very gently when one is working with one's mind, when one is working with one's perception. And when you drift away, it says, Gary just drifted away, started thinking about something else, and I'm going to bring it back to, I'm going to start watching my thoughts again. And what happens is that with time, those stretches of time of being observer get a little bit longer, and it gets a little bit easier. And you start applying it not just in a quiet room, but in also another situation. If you're sitting there at a meeting, just sit back, just observe your mind, and also observe the meeting at the same time. You can do both at the same time. So become observer of yourself, of your mind, and observer of everything else that's happening around you. It's called awareness. So you're not just aware of the external environment, you're also aware of your internal environment, what your state of mind is. So with time and with practice, it gets a bit easier, but that's not a natural state to most people. The reason why is because the natural state, the default state, is a hijacked state of being hijacked in the movie theater. It's hard to step back because all of your senses are synchronized. But it's possible, and it happens in practice, just like with any new skill. And the more you do that, the better, the smoother will be the function of your mind. You're going to lose the extremes of negative emotions, and you're going to be more in a state of calmness, more state of peace, and state of awareness, and a state of relaxed awareness. It's a much more beautiful and more aesthetic state than the normal default state.
So Gary, I know you and I have been big fans of Sri Kumar Rao and really impacted by his first book, which is called Are You Ready to Succeed? And in the book Are You Ready to Succeed was the first time, I think in 2012 when I read it, where he had that just wonderful chapter on mental chatter. So you call it thoughts, he calls it mental chatter. And the way he covers it in his book is, you have this thing, you thought it was you, it may not be you, but it's really irritating. And it is a barrage, an army of all of these thoughts which emanate from who knows where. And there's so many of them, and they're coming so fast and so furious that you've been blocking them and you've been ignoring them, and you're just talking to yourself all the time. And 97% of it is really negative stuff that you would be embarrassed to share with anyone. And you think you're the only one saying all these negative things to yourself. So his recommendation is you write it down in 4 columns, sit down at a quiet place. What do I say to myself about my body? What do I say to myself about my relationships? What I say to myself about my profession? What I say to myself about family? And he says, just write furiously, write for a week, keep writing, don't question it, just write it down, see how often you say it to yourself, and then look at it and go, oh my gosh, how sick am I to be saying all of these things to myself all the darn time. And then he says, now you understand what your personal challenges are, because you've got all this talk and all this negativity going on over and over and over. You can't stop it, but you're telling me, Gary, to listen to it and to watch it. And what am I going to do with that?
Well, you're listening to it and you watch it and you become aware of it. And then if you want, you can write it down. That's what Dr. Rao does through journaling, because when you're writing it down, you're actually seeing what your mind was thinking, which was the product of your mind. And when you write it down and you chapter it for days or weeks or whatever you want, you realize how useless most of the product of our mind is when you're just sitting there quietly. It serves really no productive purpose. It doesn't make us happy. It actually makes us more miserable. So he says to write it down, because that's a pretty formal way of doing it. But first the thought comes into your mind, and you can either observe and write it down, or you can write it down and you can read it and observe the products of your mind. And I find that most of the product of the mind, is, other than where we focus, for example, on something else, most of it is white noise. It serves no purpose in the modern time, in the current times that we live in. And much of it is non-productive and much of it is negative, or a good part of it is negative. So where does that come from? Why this drift towards negativity? So imagine 10 years ago, imagine 10,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago, our ancestors are walking through savannah. And then you hear some rustling in the bushes. What is the first thing that they thought of? The first thing they thought of is saber-toothed tiger. Even though 99.9% of the time it was not a saber-toothed tiger, it was simply a rustling of the wind through the bushes. The first thing that our ancestors thought of was saber-toothed tiger. And the reason why is because that type of wiring, that type of thought kept us safe. Because if we didn't think a saber-toothed tiger 100% of the time, the 0.1% that it was a saber-toothed tiger would be catastrophic, would be death. So that's why our thinking drifted more in that direction. But that thinking was actually developed not by us, it was developed by evolution. We are not the strongest animal on earth. We are not the fastest animal on earth. The only defenses we have was our mind, and how our mind was wired, and how it was wired to perceive things, to process the information that came in from the outside to the inside. So this processing of the information, most of it is useless, is not conducive in the modern time. Our mind, our brains have not changed, our wiring and mind has not changed versus 10,000 years ago. It's essentially the same. It has not evolved that much, or very little beyond that anatomically. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to, by having discussion like that, move on to the next perceptual level, away from the default level, how we were wired and designed to perceive things. And also you have to add culture to that and upbringing to that. You all know that Colorado River that goes.
Gary, I'm sorry. I'm going to do a polling question here, because I have a lot of people asking me about polling questions. We have 3 more to do in 9 minutes. So Brittany, you got one? All right. Let your mind solve this polling question. Where is it? Okay. No, I see which of these. Oh, which page is it? 168. I apologize here. Dr. Gary Moskovitz, A, is a spine surgeon. B, has been listed as one of top surgeons in the America. C, attended the University of Toronto. D, all of the above. By the way, a very smart guy. And Gary, while they're answering this, what was the TED Talk you recommended?
The TED Talk I recommended was
Srikumar Rao has a really good TED Talk also.
Yeah. The TED Talk, you can find it on YouTube, and it's by Dr. Donald Hoffman. Do we see reality as it is? And that's a 21-minute long one, not the abbreviated 8 or 9 minutes. So 21-minute TED Talk you can find on YouTube. Excuse me, with Dr. Donald Hoffman.
And then a third excellent one is Flow, F-L-O-W. I don't remember the professor's name, but that book, Flow, F-L-O-W, is a real game changer.
Yes.
Well, okay, so Brittany, are we done with the polling question? All right. Okay, so Gary, I wrote down all this negative stuff that I keep saying to myself, realized that it's really caused me to have some unproductive mental models and some unhappy times, realized that maybe there's some things I say to myself that are okay, realized that I'm not always on my game because I'm distracted by all these thoughts, and I'm still angry because of the vase that broke, and I'm still afraid about the vase that may break in the future. So how, practically speaking, how do I bring myself to this state of flow where what I'm doing is what I want to be doing, and I become one with the race car, one with my work, one with the client I'm helping me, one with my surgery? What's the best strategy? We have 8 minutes, 9 minutes here. You read books, you meditate. What's the path?
The path is introducing new concepts and being aware of new concepts, being aware of new ways of seeing things. On a day-to-day basis, we get bombarded by all the other stuff that has been produced by somebody else and pre-digested by somebody else. So you have to step within yourself, and you have to take the time, and you have to work on your mind. Talking about working, we spend quite a bit of time taking care of our bodies. We exercise to get us into good physical shape. We try to eat healthy food. So we spend time on that, learning new things. But how much time do we really spend on working on our mind in terms of bringing our mind into most optimum conditions to enjoy the world, to enjoy our experience? The only thing that we have is the experience. So one of the analogies that I use is that when you look at the weather outside, you see clouds. At times the clouds are blue and clear and beautiful. At times the clouds turn darker and there's a storm. But storm passes, clouds get beautiful again or different. There's all types of environment. But there's one thing that remains. The one thing that remains is the sky. And all the sky does is just simply watches the clouds and understands that clouds pass. Things come and go. So when the thoughts come into your mind, whether it's negative or disturbing thoughts, just simply identify them as thoughts. It's nothing else but electrical impulses or thoughts, and be aware that the thoughts will pass, and just observe the thoughts. So the more you observe them, the faster they will pass. So you are the sky that always watching everything, aware of everything, and thoughts are simply the clouds. Just keep remembering that you are the sky that is aware of the thoughts.
So Gary, I know you meditate. Is meditation a way of doing this, or
It's one of the methodologies to optimize the smoothness or the functioning of your mind. But again, going back to the point, you have to devote time to improve your mind, not by conventional means, by learning things, by being necessarily an expert at it, the same way that you're devoting time when you exercise. If you devote 2 hours a week to your mind, improving function of your mind, you can start with those books. You're going to make a tremendous amount of progress, and you're going to enjoy life a lot more. But take the time, dedicate it to yourself, not on other activities. Dedicate 2 hours a week, whether reading or thinking about things, but reading will guide you in that direction versus just being pulled in the different directions by different demands. Oh, I have to go to the gym, I have to exercise, or I have to do this, I have to do that. Just 2 hours a week. That's all you need to do. And over time it accumulates, and you're going to find that things accelerate, and you start getting, simpler. You're going to get smarter a lot faster, a lot sooner. But the greatest benefit of it is you're going to enjoy things a lot more. You're going to be happier.
Okay. Brittany, are we in a polling question?
Yeah.
What is the poll? Which polling question are we on?
Our last one, I can improve relationships by.
Okay, so Gary, this polling question is, I can improve relationships by A, being friendly, B, bringing out the best in others, C, being kind to myself, and D, all of the above. So how would I use my thoughts to change my behavior? Because I notice that when I'm smiling and happy and being friendly and helping others, that I'm happier, and maybe then my thoughts are happier. So how do I use what you've been talking about to make that happen?
All of these are byproducts of having a more aware mind. Not just these, but financial wealth also. When your mind is functioning more efficiently and is thinking more clearly, that gives you a great competitive advantage when you're able to see things from different perspective, from different angle than a default way of seeing things. So by changing things on the inside, by seeing things differently and having different perspectives, actually more opportunities out there. So everything becomes better, everything becomes smoother. Your relationships become better, you become happier, you become financially more successful, you have better relationships with your clients, you're totally connect with your clients in that one frame. So everything emerges from that. So everything emerges from our mind. So those are all byproducts of having a smoother working mind or different state of mind. One of the exercises is start with exercises of awareness. Start watching your thoughts.
Yeah. I found Sri Kumar Rao's book, Are You Ready to Succeed, to be a very good guidebook. He designed it when he was teaching at Columbia University. The book Flow is right here. It's blue. It's on Amazon. No one can actually pronounce the name of the author, but he's a Hungarian psychiatrist, I believe, or he's a Hungarian PhD in psychology. He has a very, very nice TED talk. Michael Singer, who wrote the book, The Untethered Soul, also has a lot of YouTube videos and speaks extensively about this whole monkey brain, what to do about it and what you can't do about it. So Gary, I got a couple questions here from the audience. Let me just move them so I can read
So
them.
apologize, before I forget, very little tip, but super, super important. When you're in the state of awareness and you're observing your thoughts, and then you lose the status of the observer, and you recognize a little while later you lost your status of observer, do not taunt yourself. Do not say, God damn it, Gary, you just lost your observer status. How could you do this? I'm trying to accomplish this and you won't let me do it. When it comes to your mind and other people's mind, you have to be very gentle. You have to do everything very, very soft hand. So instead of taunting yourself, just say, well, we're just going to bring yourself nice and easy to the status of an observer. It needs to be done very smoothly and very gently without taunting yourself or accusing yourself. Because as soon as you start taunting yourself and accusing yourself, that brings in negativity, that brings in friction into your mind. So what happens is that this friction, which is not smooth, makes it much harder to drift into the status of the observer. So when you bring this friction in mind, you're actually fighting yourself. When you're taunting yourself, you're actually fighting yourself. So anyways, let's move on.
Yeah, be kind to your own inner child.
So when you're kind to your own inner child, you're also kinder to other people. Your relationships will become better and smoother. Your perception of the world will become clearer. There's going to be less negative mental chatter, less frictional stuff that interferes with perception of things.
Right. Gary, somebody asked if there are conferences or workshops that you would recommend, or transcendental meditation, or what specific programs would you recommend?
Well, everybody has a different path. So there's different path to this one thing. So my path started over 25 years ago. It was simply transcendental meditation, where you spend 20 minutes twice a day. I didn't have time at that time, but I still did it because I knew it was very important to do it. And that just brings your mind into transcendental meditation. Is not a religious technique. It has nothing to do with religion or anything like that. It's just a simple mind technique where you're in the state of meditation. You're in the different state of consciousness. You're in the gap between the thoughts, and you realize there's more to it than thoughts. And when you, from a practical point of view, approximately 20 minutes of TM is equivalent to about 3 to 4 hours of rest, of sleep. So for me as a surgeon, it was very important to be able to stay in the optimum state of mind and to be able to decompress and relax very quickly and to get smoother state of mind. So for me, it started with TM and kind of evolved from there. But there's many different states of meditation. There's walking meditation, there's breathing meditation, and so on. All of these are working on your mind. So take your pick, but do it. And also read books.
What is the role of detachment?
Role of detachment is putting a distance between a situation. Can be very difficult situation that pulls you in versus your awareness. When you step back from that captured screen, you become detached. Your decisions from the seat of awareness are much better quality decisions. Your perception is much clearer than being pulled into the situation. You will make better decisions from the state of detachment, a state of neutrality, because emotions, especially negative emotions, will distort your decision making. Your decision making is not going to be as good under the influence of strong negative emotion, not just negative emotion, but any other type of emotion. So it's state of detachment or stepping back and being aware. All it is, state of detachment is just simply stepping back and being aware of what's going on in your mind, what's going on outside. So you're detaching yourself, or you're distancing yourself from the situation. So essentially you're stepping back into the seat of awareness where you're able to observe other people in the movie theater, where you're able to observe the screen, where you're able to observe everything that's going on without being pulled into it.
Okay, next question is, what do you think about directing energy from a place of compassionate neutrality? We got some deep people on this talk.
So compassionate neutrality is simply a description. You can also use other description for something similar. So that's a description. State of peace is a description. But we're all describing one entity. So compassionate neutrality simply means if you're in that seat of awareness, it has many different qualities. You can describe it. One of the qualities is compassion, one quality is neutrality, one quality is peace, one quality is happiness, but they all describe one thing, same thing, but using different words. But words are not the thing. Words are simply descriptions. We're all describing one phenomena, and that phenomena, I believe, is a state of awareness, looking at things from the state of awareness versus being captured by it, versus attaching words or names to it, or descriptives to it. And from that state, a lot of other things emanate.
How does this, the next question is, how does this relate to non-duality, or what is non-duality?
That's a very deep, profound question. I'm not going to be able to explain it. I cannot do justice at this one. Perhaps we can have a future seminar dedicated to that, but we're going to go much deeper with that one. We're going to have to bring in quantum mechanics, quantum physics, spirituality, philosophy, all kind of blended into one. So, but that's a very deep dive. So maybe we should defer that one.
Okay. And then the last question is, how specifically can you apply these techniques to improve a marriage?
From simplest perspective, there's going to be two answers. I hope we have enough time.
Sure, yeah, we can go over. It's to improve a marriage, so it's worth it.
To improve the marriage? Well, realize that when you're an attorney or an accountant, you're a certain position of power or influence. There's an ego that comes into this thing. The skills of being an attorney, a surgeon, or an accountant, or a businessman are totally different skills that we use, totally different skills that we need in a marriage. From practical point of view, when you come into your house, you leave your shoes at your door and you put on a different hat. You put on a hat of being a good spouse and a good husband, and not a hat of a high power attorney or an accountant or a surgeon. The ego stays outside. I'm going to introduce another concept. When you fall in love with a person, Do you fall in love with that actual person, or do you fall in love with your idea of that person? Next step, you fall in love with that person because you're in love with them and you've been married for a few years, and then things start to happen and your idea of that person starts to change, and you start seeing or perceiving negative things about that person. Those negative things start to grow within your mind, and you fall in love, you fall out of love with that person. So in those last few years, has that person changed? Probably not, but your idea of that person has changed, and you were totally unaware that your idea of that person has changed.
Wow. That is profound.
So that's one of the byproducts of not having awareness.
All right, Gary, well, the feedback has been very positive. It's been very interesting. Having traveled some of these trails with you, I can only say that they are very, very impactful, very, very practical, very useful, very powerful. So I hope that people do read the books, and we'll definitely have to have a deeper dive, especially the non-dualism will be very interesting. Thank you so much, because your content is very sincere, very real, very sophisticated, and very honest. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Alan. It's good seeing you. And also good seeing you, Proxy.
Right. All right, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your Saturday, rest of your week, and enjoy your thoughts. Thank you.